Hello, third graders. So we're going to continue with chapter 4 on the topic of communities and how they change over time. But we are going to begin with lesson 6. And the topic for lesson 6 is what makes my community special. This is the textbook, and we're going to start with our workbooks first and then move over to the textbook again. So for the things that we're aiming for, things that we're going to be doing in this lesson are what are we going to be investigating? And the first thing we're going to look for is how our communities are special. Then, why are we learning about it? We want to make sure that we know about our geography. So that means the location that we're at and the history of it, as well as the cultures and the people who live in our community. And then lastly, how will you know that you've learned it? You'll know by being able to explain what makes your community special or unique. And then you're going to be writing about your own community and describing what makes it special. This is due on Thursday. And next week, Monday, don't forget that you have a project. The instructions have already been left in Google Classroom. The video from 4-1 in your social studies also has that information. And if you're not sure, you can go ahead and leave us a comment on Google Classroom for more information. So we have an image here, and it shows Native American dancers performing a traditional dance. It doesn't say where it's located, but looking at the photo what details can you find in it, and what do you find interesting about it? What do you think it shows about the community? So go ahead and think about that while we get started on the next page. And we're on page 175, going to 176, if you're following along in your practice book, your social studies practice book. So first thing we're going to do, same as always, analyze the source and make sure that you annotate your text. Read the title. What do you think this text will be about? So we already can see that the title says linking to the past. And you're going to write what you think the text will be about down here in your notes. Then circle any words you don't know. Underline details that explain why streetcars are important to New Orleans. Let's get started on the text to find out what it's talking about. New Orleans became known for streetcars, jazz clubs, and Mardi Gras during the 1900s. Tourists from around the world visited the city. Levees and canals were built to protect the city from flooding. Then Hurricane Katrina struck the city in 2005. How old were you in 2005? The levees were no match for the storm. Much of New Orleans flooded. It took many years for New Orleans to be built again, to rebuild again. New Orleans has kept links to its rich and interesting past. Let's look at one of those links. New Orleans streetcars are famous around the world. They are one of the oldest street railways still in operation. New Orleans was the first place west of the Allegheny Mountains to have a street railway service. Streetcars first began in 1835 to connect New Orleans and a suburb. They were powered by steam. And we have an image down here. Much of New Orleans was rebuilt after Hurricane Katrina. A lot of New Orleans was damaged after that hurricane, and it did hurt many people as well as businesses, and it affected the lives of many people in New Orleans as well as Louisiana as a whole. Streetcars are a symbol of New Orleans. Even today, they run on many New Orleans streets. So now we know what streetcars are, and you can answer this part. Underline details that explain why streetcars are important to New Orleans. Steam trains were replaced by horse-drawn cars and then by electricity in 1893. New Orleans had more than 350 streetcars that each held 28 people by the beginning of the 1900s. Some streetcars were painted olive green, while others were painted red and gold. During the 1930s, people preferred cars and buses. Fewer streetcars were needed. By the 1960s, most streetcars were retired. one streetcar line became a National Historic Landmark. In 1988, New Orleans built a new streetcar line. Some people used the streetcars to get to work. Tourists found the streetcars charming and a great way to see some of New Orleans' historic sites. More and more people began using streetcars again. Today, streetcars are an important part of New Orleans transportation and history. So it says that streetcars are an important part of New Orleans transportation and history, which is directly talking about what this question was asking you to underline. So make sure that you underline and you annotate your text. Now we're going to find evidence. So reread, why have streetcars in New Orleans once again become a popular form of transportation? You already know that it said for the communities that use the streetcars, some of them use it to get to work, but it became popular because of tourists. And then underline clues that support your ideas. So you need to find evidence that says that it became popular again. Where was the sentence about how people use it to get to work? Where was the sentence about tourists? Make sure that you underline those. And then you can think about why streetcars are an important part of New Orleans history. What do you know about your community's history? And what things from the past do you still find where you live? If you can think of anything about San Diego that you think is old and was probably there for a long time, do you think it's anything like streetcars in New Orleans? Do you think that that's unique to San Diego? Do you think that we have any forms of transportation or something like that that are as important or as useful? In San Francisco, they still have railway cars or streetcars like these. And San Diego still has the trolley, but can we say that that's the same thing as a streetcar? So you guys can think about that while we go to the next page. So we're going to explore and draw conclusions. That means you're going to find an answer. A conclusion is a decision you made about a topic. You already know, you use what you already know and information from what you've been reading to draw a conclusion. First, we have to read the text, which we already did. Read about how the details and ideas in the text are connected. So based on the information that we just read, what do you think is connected between streetcars and New Orleans? Think about what you already know about the topic. Sometimes the author does not tell you everything. You have to use what you already know to understand the text. And the third thing you have to do is draw a conclusion. Drawing a conclusion from what you read and what you already know. And then based on what you read from the text, you are going to answer the chart below, which with the question, how do the people of New Orleans feel about the streetcars? So you can already see that they've already organized it for you, text clues and what I already know. And then here you have a conclusion. So what you actually think is the answer will go here. And the text clues and what you already know, when we go back to the pages, because we always have to show our sources. We can't just say, I think this without being able to prove it. Got to be able to prove it. So it says here, during the 1930s, people preferred cars and buses. So does that mean that they preferred streetcars if you lived there? Then you have to read the next sentence. Fewer streetcars were needed. By the 1960s, most streetcars were retired. So was anyone really using them during the 1960s, 1930s to 60s? If they were retired, most of them. And then it says here, one streetcar line became the National Historic Landmark. So it sounds like there was only one main line that was left. Then in 1988, New Orleans built a new streetcar line. And some people used the streetcars to get to work. Tourists found the streetcars charming and a great way to see some of New Orleans' historic sites. More and more people began using streetcars again. Today, streetcars are an important part of New Orleans transportation and history. So from what we've read, let's answer this part. Text clues and what you already know. We know, based on the information that was on the previous page, that yes, streetcars were used, but not everyone used them. And after a while, they became pretty rare. How do we know this? Because we found a sentence on the other page that said that most people preferred cars or buses or horse-drawn carriages rather than streetcars. And you can even have that about as part of your conclusion. But don't forget the other part, that later, when streetcars began getting more popular after they made a new streetcar line, people started using them again to go to work and they liked them. So when it says, how do the people of New Orleans feel about streetcars? You can write the text evidence that we just talked about. And the conclusion, you can even put that in the beginning, people chose to use streetcars less and less. And then later on, when they made a new streetcar line, people began using them again. And that's just one type of conclusion. For your own conclusion, you can come up with your own ideas based on the text and clues of what you already know. So if you've already annotated, you're already halfway there. Now we're going to get started on the investigate page. And it says to read pages 188 to 195 in your research textbook. Use your investigative skills to look for text evidence that tells you why communities are special. That is the main thing that we are looking for. Then draw conclusions about what makes a community a special place. This chart will help you organize your notes. So here we're going to write text clues about what I already know about those communities. We're going to write it here, and the conclusion. So same thing as what he wrote here. So text evidence, information goes over here, and then what you actually think the text is trying to tell you from the text on this side. So let's go to page 188 in your textbook. So we're on lesson 6. What makes my community special? The past affects the present. Look around your community. What do you see? Are there old buildings or old roads? What are the names on the street signs? What languages do you see? What languages do you hear? What types of restaurants do you see? The answer helps you understand what makes each community special. For some communities, their names give us clues about who lived and worked there. For example, Edison, New Jersey, was once called Raritan Township. However, in 1954, its name was changed to honor inventor Thomas Edison. The laboratory he worked was in Menlo Park, part of the township. Thomas Alva Edison Memorial Tower in Edison, New Jersey. If you remember from 4-4, we talked about famous people in history and who they were and why they affected the communities around them. We talked about Thomas Edison and his struggle with hearing. And we also talked about someone else who had a struggle with communicating, but she was able to go to college and she was able to learn and study. Who was that person? If you can remember it, tell me in class, and we can give you a bonus point for it. In some neighborhoods, we're going to move to the next page. In some neighborhoods, the names of the streets give us clues about the community's history. Bridge Street in Trenton, New Jersey is named after the first bridge to cross the Delaware from Trenton. Carteret Avenue is named for Sir George Carteret. He was an early owner of New Jersey. So he owned New Jersey when it was originally being divided. Some streets are named for features that are found in the area. These include trees, plants, animals, or geographic features. Some of the places include Cedar Street, Briar Lane, and Quail Court in Burns Township, New Jersey. Palisade Avenue in Englewood, New Jersey, is named for the steep cliffs that are found along part of the Hudson River. Some streets are named for famous people who were important to our country's history. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in Jersey City, New Jersey, is named for a leader of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s. Rosa Parks Avenue in Montgomery, Alabama, is named for civil rights activist Rosa Parks. These are just a few examples of how history affects a community. If you can tell me what page and what Rosa Parks did for her community, and you can tell me either in person, if we're back in person, or over Zoom, then I will give you a bonus point for that. And good job for you for watching the videos ahead of time. And let's continue to the next page. Here you can see we have Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive as a street. We also have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Avenue or Drive in San Diego, but I can't remember exactly where it is. The ways communities can change. The geography of many communities throughout the United States has changed over time. People have changed the land in communities to meet their needs. Communities may make adjustments to the buildings to protect them from natural disasters. These changes can help make a community unique. So if you remember early on in the other chapters, we talked about how land will change over time depending on who's living there and what they do to the land. We've also talked about it, I believe, with fourth grade because we were talking about how the Chicago River, the river itself, the direction that it was traveling in changed. So we already know that in the other lessons, from the other lessons, that communities change not just the people, but also the land that is being lived on. A community that lived there 100 years ago might have designed their houses differently, might have done different things to their land. Maybe they put farms there. And a community 100 years later, they might put houses there. Many houses in New Orleans and other hurricane-prone communities use pilings to raise their houses. So you can see here on the bottom that there's this empty space and the houses actually begin up there. So yes, there's these stairs, but at least now if the water comes, then it will not directly affect the house. It might go maybe even as tall as this tree right here, but the house up here should be pretty safe unless the water rises extremely high. Some cities are below sea level, such as New Orleans, Louisiana. Levees were built to make it possible for people to live there. A levee is a wall meant to prevent water from flooding places during a storm. However, the levees did not protect New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina in 2005. A new levee system has been built since then. It has been designed in place so less water is likely to escape onto the land. Communities near the ocean have built walls called breakwaters to prevent flooding. Some breakwaters are called living breakwaters. They reduce flooding risks. They also help reef habitat and prevent erosion. A living breakwater is being developed in Staten Island, New York. So these are examples that they're giving of how they have already changed the land to adjust to make sure that people are able to live on these lands now. Some communities have changed the look of their houses to protect them from disasters. In New Orleans, some homes are placed on stilt-like structures called pilings. Pilings are meant to keep homes high enough the ground to avoid flooding. We've already talked about the pilings and how they're maybe a good 6 feet off the ground. Communities keep histories alive. Streets in communities can help us remember the past. Many streets in the United States were once paved with bricks. Some were widened, paved over with concrete. Some communities are fighting to keep the brick streets. They say brick streets keep the community's history alive. Let's pause for a second. If your community had brick streets, or if you're not sure if it did, do you think that if a city had brick streets, that it would be better to keep it, or would it be better to put concrete over it? And why do you think that? You can go ahead and write that inside your notes on your other page in your practice book, your social studies notebook or practice book. Many communities look like they did long ago. Downtown Lanesboro, Minnesota has many historic homes and old-fashioned shops. Buildings are built in a Spanish style in many Florida and California cities because the Spanish were early settlers in these communities. So if you remember in the other lesson, I was talking about if I was going to give examples of San Diego, I could give examples of how the Spanish were responsible for San Diego, or not responsible, but were settled in San Diego. And so they made a lot of buildings in the same style that they did back in Spain. And this style still exists till now. We've talked about it in the other lesson as well, with the thick white walls and then the red roofs. And it says here, the courthouse in Santa Barbara, California is built in a Spanish style. It has white plaster walls and red clay tile roofs. If you know any buildings that are like this, go ahead and tell me when you on Google Classroom or whenever you get the chance, so that way we can see what buildings you know that have these similar designs. Monuments connect to the past. Many monuments are found across the United States. A monument is a building, statue, or another structure that honors a person, place, or event in history. A monument is sometimes referred to as a memorial. The Oculus in New York City is a monument that honors the victims of the terrorist attack on September 11, 2001. On that day, the World Trade Center was destroyed. The Oculus is a transportation center. Part of the building is a 335-foot long skylight. When the skylight is opened, it reminds people of what happened on that day at 10:28 in the morning of September 11, 2001. The North Tower of the World Trade Center fell. Each year, the skylight will be opened at that time. So a skylight is kind of like a window, but it's just on the roof. So this is the skylight right here. And this is the Oculus in New York. Another important monument is the statue of a pioneer that stands on top of the Oregon State Capitol. This Oregon pioneer is a symbol of Oregon settlers. It stands for their determination and independence. So these are talking about the European settlers that came after the expansion west. So there were Native American people living here already, but we are talking about the European pioneers that traveled from East Coast to West Coast. This symbol has been part of the Capitol building since 1938. The gold statue is 23 feet tall and weighs 8.5 tons. Visitors can reach it by climbing up a spiral staircase of 121 steps. I cannot say that this is 100% gold because I don't know if they would make a statue out of 100% gold, but it might be gold colored. And it says the pioneer statue stands atop of the Oregon State Capitol. Cloud Gate. Now we're talking about the did you know part. Cloud Gate is a major work of art found in Chicago, Illinois. The sculpture is located in Millennium Park in the heart of the city. Indian-born British sculptor Anish Kapoor designed Cloud Gate. It was completed in 2006 and has become a highlight of the park. People from Chicago and visitors alike want to see its reflection and touch its surface. Cloud Gate's peculiar shape allows it to reflect the city's skyline. So if you see right here, this is all the buildings that are surrounding it because of its bent shape. This reflection bends the Chicago skyline and around its surface. The sculpture symbolizes a gate into the city. Chicagoans have nicknamed the sculpture the Bean. The nickname is because of its unusual shape. So if you've seen a kidney bean, this is what it's supposed to. This is why they call it the Bean. And then you can stop and check for a second about different monuments and how they show the past. And why do you think they're important to a community? Why do you think a monument will be something that community might want to have? And let's have a little field trip to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So here's Pennsylvania and here's Pittsburgh. And on this side is probably the Atlantic Ocean. Pittsburgh is the second largest city in Pennsylvania. More than 300,000 people live there. The city has many neighborhoods. People from all over the world live in those neighborhoods. Let's take a trip downtown to see some of the places in Pittsburgh. So here you have the highway, and here you have a photo, and here you have another photo. So this first photo is the Cathedral of Learning. The Cathedral of Learning is on the campus of the University of Pittsburgh. It's a national historical landmark. The first class was held here. The first class was held in this building in 1931. It has 42 floors. It's the tallest educational building in the Western Hemisphere. Oh, educational building. The second building that we have below is the Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens opened in 1893. It's one of Pittsburgh's national landmarks. This attraction includes 23 different gardens and 14 room glass houses. Visitors here can view exotic plants. If you have been to Balboa Park's conservatory, or not sure if that's the actual name, But in downtown, we have something similar to this. And it also has a variation of different plants, including the Venus flytrap and other exotic plants. Number 3 is the Andy Warhol Museum. And the Andy Warhol Museum contains the largest collection of Warhol's art in the world. It opened in 1994. Visitors can see Warhol's early works and his pop art. They can get a close look at both the man and the artist. So they haven't showed inside images, but this is where it's at. And then there's Market Square, which is one of Pittsburgh's oldest buildings, oldest places for people to meet and greet each other. It was designed in 1764 and originally called Diamond Square or Market. It held a courthouse and a jail. It was where Pittsburgh's first newspaper was printed. In 1961, the original site was demolished. Then the new Market Square was created. Today, Market Square has been redesigned. It attracts huge crowds at its restaurants and many entertainment options. So this is Market Square right here. Here's the river, and on the other side. And then this is what it looks like today. And then, so we're back on page 179 in your practice books, and we're going to be using the text that we already read and the information that we read from there to have to write some clues down and what we think about the topic. So from the information that we were reading about, we were talking about monuments of the past. We were talking about ways that communities can change and the history of those communities and all different ways that communities can be special. So here we talked about monuments and we talked about streets. And then we talked about ways that they change the buildings from the designs to the roads. And then we talked about, of course, monuments and different attractions. And of course, we talked about Pittsburgh and how all of these parts of it make up a very unique city. So if we were going to say what the main points that we think the text was trying to tell us, almost kind of like a code, what do you think that they're trying to tell you? What's the main important information that they keep repeating inside there again and again? We know that they're talking about communities. We know that they're talking about ways that these communities are special or interesting. So when we're writing our sentences, we already are going to be able to find information about Pittsburgh, about different places in the United States, New York City, Chicago, Illinois, or Oregon. It doesn't say where in Oregon, does it? It says Oregon State Capital, but I believe Oregon's capital is in, I'm not sure where it is, but we can find that out. And then here we talked about the way that they change the land so that way people can live on it better. And then ways that they keep history alive. So the main thing that they keep talking about again and again is talking about communities. So if the question is asking what makes communities special, because that's what we said we're looking for, then text clues that we can write about are that each community that we were reading about had its own different design for buildings. It had its own history. It had its own famous landmarks, and it had its own streets. It had its own unique monuments. And then from that, you can make a conclusion that the things that make a community special are things that are important to the people in that community. So for Pittsburgh, they talked about how they wanted a place that they could meet each other. And so they had the market. They also talked about the bean as a national, not a national monument, but as a tourist attraction. They talked about information from Louisiana, talking about how the buildings were changed differently. So the structure is different probably than how you design a house in California because they have different living conditions in New Orleans. And then, of course, we have the one from Santa Monica here, showing how our buildings are influenced by the Spanish. So from that, we can make a conclusion that each community has different histories, has different cultures that affect them, and has different reasons for why they have what they consider important. And that's just my type of conclusion. When you're writing your own, make sure that you write it in your own words. What are some things that you think they're trying to tell you from all the other information on the other pages? We repeated the word community. We repeated, which words were repeated again and again? Why do you think that they kept talking about communities changing, or what makes the community special with the signs and the past and the present? Why would they show that information? Do you think that that's important, or do you think that it's just information they're trying to give you for no reason? And if you think that they're doing it for a reason, make sure that you show that in your conclusion. Make sure that you explain it, saying, I think that the text is trying to show us, or the text clues are trying to show us that communities are similar in many ways and different in many ways too, or whichever point that you see repeats again and again, that's probably the main thing that they're trying to give you from the text. Once you're done with that, we'll go ahead and go to the next page. And for here, write about it and think about it. Try to think about the information we just read. Why do you think all communities are different? Do you think every community has the same group of people every single time, or do you think that each community has a different group every time? Do you think they're the same amounts? Do you think that everyone is always going to have the same opinions? These are important things to think about even when you make your project, because your community is definitely going to be impacted. It's going to be changed. It's going to be designed based on the people who live there. So for the first part, make sure that you can write what makes a community special, what things make a community special. If we were looking at the text, because we should always show our work and we should always show where we got our answers from, then if we were going to write about Santa Barbara, California, because maybe we want to talk about a place that we know about, kind of, close by, then we can say that this community is special because it has Spanish style. We can say that it has plaster walls and red clay roofs. But we can also say that how buildings look is one way that makes a community special. How we can say that for Louisiana and California, they're definitely probably not going to have the same type of style. In the other lesson, we talked about Chicago, and we talked about how their buildings, how their communities were affected based on how easy or how hard it was to get jobs. And that's another thing that can make a community special. More people will come to a place and will make a community bigger if there's more jobs for them to work in. So those are all different things that can make a community special. And then down here, for the in your own opinion, write a blog post about your community, its people, and its places. List reasons why you think your community is special. So since we all live in San Diego, let's think for a second about what's your favorite part of San Diego? What is your favorite place to go to? If it's SeaWorld, if it's Legoland, if it's even going to the San Diego Zoo, San Diego Wild Animal Park, going to the beach. There's lots of options that you can choose for why you think your community is special. And if you were going to write a blog about it, so I'm pretty sure that everyone's seen a vlogger or seen a YouTuber talk about a cool thing or a cool place that they've been. And so now you're going to act like one, and you're going to act kind of like a news reporter and describe what you think is special about your community. And make sure you use your complete sentences. I know you know how to use punctuation. I know you know how to use your capital letters. And so I want you to show me it here when you write your answers, talking about why you think San Diego is special, or even your neighborhood. It doesn't even have to be the whole city of San Diego. If you want to just talk about your specific neighborhood, that's okay too. If you want to talk about City Heights, you want to talk about La Mesa, you want to talk about Mira Mesa, you want to talk about Coronado, just depends on where you live. Each place has its own special reasons, and it's its own community. It's part of a bigger community, which is in San Diego, but there are tiny communities inside of a community too. Then you are going to connect it to the essential question that we've been trying to answer for all of chapter 4, and think about the role history has played in your community. How have events and people of the past helped make your community special? So this is again connecting back to the other lesson and how people and events affect the communities that we live in. We wouldn't have the community we have now without the people who were living in it before. If we wanted a nice house, or if we wanted a park in our neighborhood and you started it today, you might not see that park get built until maybe 5 or 10 years later. So if you have a building, or if you have a person in your community that you know has helped change or make the community better, that's definitely someone you can write about, because you can talk about their role and their history that has played in your community. So that means you're going to be talking about what did they do that was so special that made your community better. If you want to talk about the community of the United States, and you wanted to talk about how Benjamin Banneker helped uh, show or ask for equal rights for African Americans, and helped show that we're all equal, and that we're all more than um, just whatever they thought African Americans were, then that's one person who had a big impact on how the rest of America changed. If we want to talk about Ford and his creation of cars, and how you think that he has impacted the rest of America through, now everyone has the ability to buy a car, and now there are a lot of different car brands, but he was one of the first. And so if you think that that's something that could impact history, if you want to talk about Harriet Tubman and how she had not only helped free other slaves, but she also freed her own family. And then she helped during the Civil War. And then after the Civil War, she helped take care of elderly people in her own home, and how you think that will affect the community. Then you can write about that too. But make sure that you explain it out. And if you're going to use your own community, then you have to talk about the events and the people in the past that help make your community special. So you can research this and say where you researched it from, and just make sure that you include it in your answer. And there is a project due on Monday, so make sure that you have completed it and you looked over the guidelines, which are available on Google Classroom, before you turn it in. You have been told multiple times through Google Classroom, through Zoom, to check and make sure that you have fulfilled or you've answered all of the parts of the project. I know that you can do it, but you still have to take some time to get pictures, to write it out, and of course to design it, because you're going to be presenting this in front of your classmates. So make sure that you're ready. Until next time, I think you guys are going to start science after this. So this is the end of chapter 4.